Hey Phantoms, just really wanted to reach out to each and every one of you, specifically regarding broker regulations, how to choose a broker. Now this video isn't necessarily going to be pointing you towards or providing you with any recommendations on any specific broker per se. However, if you are looking for a broker and you're not entirely sure who to go with, please feel free to reach out to me in a DM or in a private message, however you feel comfortable, providing what you're looking for, and we can of course have a discussion, and hopefully I can help point you into the right direction. But ultimately, this kind of video is primarily going to give you an insight and a better understanding on brokers, the regulations, the regulatory jurisdictions, and the effects they have. Because what I'm finding is a lot of individuals, not necessarily just within this community, but overall, a lot of individuals just don't have a clue. Some have an okay understanding, but it's still very apparent that people aren't entirely sure of the framework of a broker. So what we'll do is we'll go through a couple of slides, and these slides aren't completely detailed. They're just decent runners for me to kind of talk off different topics, different subjects, and different regulatory pieces within the mix. And inside that, we'll of course go over regulations, we'll go over ESMA, we'll go over brokers, we'll go over registrations, we'll go over different things such as leverage, margin, just so that everyone can understand, hopefully in a better, clearer, greater detail, and just how to go about selecting a broker and all of the different pieces that are involved. So without further ado, let's dive in and let's get started. Okay, so there are a number of different broker regulations and regulatory jurisdictions. One thing that it does mean, and you will find, is just because a broker is dual regulated or multi-regulated, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be protected under all of that regulatory jurisdiction, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're protected under all of those client protections and provisions they put in place. So, for example, some brokers and different brokers and many brokers have had to become dual regulated or multi-regulated on the back of the FCA and on the back of the European SISEC Commission, and most recently the Australian Asset Commission, introducing new leverage rules, restrictions, as well as margin caps as well. So if we look at the UK FCA, many brokers strive to become FCA regulated under the UK jurisdiction, and seemingly so, many brokers in the European entity will of course look to become European SISEC. And needless to say, if you're in Australia, like IC Markets for example, they are regulated under ASIC. So if we look at a typical broker, let's say they're regulated by the UK FCA. Now, in 2017-2018, between the conglomeration of UK and EU, they introduced something called ESMA, which is the European Securities Market Authority. Now, ESMA introduced a rule following on from all financial services, really, but primarily because of binary options. Now, if you're not completely aware, binary options are now pretty much illegal to trade and operate within the UK and European entities, and what ESMA and the ESMA Act went about to introduce was the following: to mitigate risk, to try and control the spread of losses throughout the financial markets through these illicit brokers, because unfortunately binary options entirely, the only individuals that gained were the company and the broker itself. They was the biggest synthetic product that was created, and they induced that gambling mentality, and unfortunately a lot of people fell for it. That in turn also led them on to try to restrict, and which they have done successfully, leverage throughout the UK and Europe. Now, leverage across UK and Europe before this kind of ESMA regulation and ESMA ruling was introduced, you could get crazy leverage. Some brokers, the worst brokers of the lot, would be offering 2,000 to 1 leverage, so 1 to 2,000. But the average throughout Europe and UK was anywhere between 200 to 500. Even 500 is extremely excessive. And something to note as well, if you are a consistently profitable trader or deemed a professional trader, the maximum leverage you'll ever get is 1 to 100. In many circumstances, you will start off with higher leverage, but as soon as they realise you're a consistently profitable trader or deemed professional and you're consistently, continuously banking and taking from the book, so to speak, they will look to decrease that leverage. And you've got to remember that these brokers, they are businesses as well. Whilst many brokers are legitimate, they do care for your trading, they do want to improve your trading. As a house, they want to win net down. But let's drift back. So just because a broker is regulated under either the UK FCA and EU SISEC, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be protected by those pieces of protection and client protection they have in place if you were to sign up with one of their other entities. So let's just say you was to go under the St. Vincent's and Grenadines Financial Services Authority, which would allow you to get 1 to 500 leverage. You're actually not protected by the UK whatsoever. And the reason that was introduced is primarily because the brokers had nowhere else to go. When ESMA was introduced, it forced the broker's hand. The brokers don't necessarily want to give you less protection. The brokers don't necessarily want to push you to an offshore entity. However, there is a huge demand for the lower end traders that want to deposit $50, $250 or less, or a little bit more, up to $1,000, and have that advantage of getting involved in multiple positions and having their margin requirements met to ensure they can actually trade an okay or sizable position, granted, and it's all relative. So of course, to fill that demand, they had to seek alternative regulations. They had to seek alternative offshore regulations, which thus in turn actually gives the consumer, the client, the trader less protection. And that's not the brokers doing necessarily. That's the regulatories doing. The FCA, SISEC, and now ASIC have pushed their clients to potentially get less protection, or pushed their regulatory into individuals within their kind of jurisdictions to go offshore, because there is a demand. They do still want to trade. They want to have that ability of changing X into Z through structured methodology, through different trading communities, and unfortunately, the brokers, to fill that demand, have had to seek that offshore entity and regulation. So just to clarify and just to summarise that point in total, if a broker is regulated in the UK under the FCA or the European SISEC or the Australian ASIC, and you sign up to one of their other regulatory brands, be it St. Vincent's and Grenadines, be it the Financial Services Commission through Mauritius, or any other regulatory entity that they possibly have, you are not protected under the same protections as the FCA, as SISEC, as ASIC. Now, if we move on to the next slide, obviously, and focus primarily on client security, what the brokers tend to do, if you're not going to be regulated under UK FCA, under SISEC, under ASIC, but look for one of their offshore global entities that, of course, offer a different regulation, and regulation would be quoted here because, of course, it isn't as protected as the upper three on the previous slide, which was FCA, SISEC, and ASIC. They do tend to put in additional protections or still offer as many protections as possible as they can, but do remember that on the next slide, we'll cover this in a bit more detail, is within the UK under FCA, you're covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, and under SISEC, you're also protected by the European Commission Scheme as well, which of course they have varying balances between the two entities, but we'll cover that on the next slide. So the brokers themselves, they've got these offshore entities that have some form of regulations, be it St. Vincent's and Grenadines, be it Mauritius, be it the Maldives, be it Seychelles, be it some beautiful offshore location. They will still offer, in most circumstances, custodial segregated accounts. Now, for those of you that don't know what they are, it basically means that client money is not mixed with company money. So if that company were to go into liquidation or close down tomorrow, your funds are held in custodial segregated non-interest bearing accounts. So many brokers that I speak to, their segregated accounts and custodial accounts are with either Barclays, Coutts, HSBC, Goldman's, JP, and the likes. Now, what other brokers do as well, and what these brokers will look to do, is offer, most recently, negative balance protection. Now, it's all relative, because if I've got a 100k trading account and I'm only risking 1%, and let's say, you know, I'm an absolutely awful trader and I blow that whole account on a couple of really bad trades, realistically, if you're doing correct and proper strict risk management rules, or stick to your rules as closely as possible, and you're losing by 1% on £100, let's say, as you decrease your account balance, your AUM, from 100 down to 20, if you're still sticking to that 1% rule and you're not kind of deviating from that rule, you're only going to be risking 1% of £20. If you move down to £10, you're going to be risking 1% of £10, and so on. So realistically, getting into that negative balance area is very hard to do when you're risking such a small percentage on the account under management. However, if you're risking, you know, excessively, and you were to go into negative territory, i.e. under zero, let's say you went at £100 in drawdown on your account and you had no funds available, with negative balance protection, these brokers will wipe that amount and clear it back to zero. Of course, all of your funds that you did once have and you traded would no longer be present. Let's say you deposited $100 into a trading account, let's just say, and you lost that $100 and then a further $100, so minus 100 on your balance. They would wipe that clean to zero. Thus, you wouldn't owe the broker or the market anything, but in turn, you wouldn't have any more trading capital, so you would need to redeposit back into your trading account to, of course, get going again. And obviously what other brokers have started to do as well is they've really tried to ensure that their liquidity providers, their servers, are extremely close to the LPs, and of course that in turn will create low latency. Now, what low latency means to the average trader in layman's term is it reduces slippage. So when executing, the better your ping speed, the better your execution, it all comes down to latency. And of course, the closer to zero that it is, the better. So you'll find that some of the traders I kind of deal through will range from 5 milliseconds to 14 milliseconds execution on the ping. However, other brokers that I've come across, like Pepperstone and others, are ranging around 20 to 40 milliseconds execution on the ping. So it doesn't matter too much, but ultimately, if you want to reduce slippage as much as possible, then you're of course going to be focusing on brokers that potentially provide you with that low latency remit. Most brokers will do, regardless of their regulations, but one thing to note is it doesn't drop just because you go to their offshore regulated entity. So they will still have, at the bare minimum, usually these three additional pieces of client security. Now, most of them as well will still abide by standard anti-money laundering, AML and KYC custodial laws, and of course they do require regulations in some force, and the UK FCA, European SISEC, AU ASIC will of course be some of the best outside of course of the SEC and the United States, because as we all know, those individuals within the US, they struggle to find any brokers that will allow them to open a trading account other than those that of course already do, which is very limited indeed, because primarily they want their clients and their US individuals and citizens to execute through futures, which they find much more of a regulated and secure industry over CFDs and spread betting. Spread betting is a whole different kettle of fish. It's a synthetic market that has been created for you that is basically the broker trading against you. CFDs are slightly different, of course. They have an A book, B book methodology. Again, just remember, guys, yeah, they are hedging your trades. They do have trades opposite to you because they know the percentages of this game. You'd be foolish to run a broker and not have a B book when you know that 80-90% of traders lose money. Luckily, we're in a small minority, and many of you are coming up the ranks, becoming from retail to retail professional, that potentially puts you into that minority where you understand your edge, you understand the methodology, you understand where the market is. And the greatest thing of all is the fact that I've had conversations with brokers, and there have been people in this community that are executing with specific brokers, and the broker says, you know, these guys are incredible traders. They know their levels, and that is key. If a broker is saying that, you're doing the right things. But let's move on to the next slide, because I do digress. So let's look at client protection in its easiest and purest form. Now, if you are to go under a UK regulated broker and go under the FCA, you will of course be protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which is £85,000 per person per firm, or £150,000 per joint account per firm. So what that means is, of course, if you had a deposit in that account of £85,000 and that company, for whatever reason, blah blah blah, you'd be protected for the sum of up to £85,000, and you would of course put a claim in via the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, the FSCS. If you had a joint account, conversely, you would do exactly the same, but the difference is it would be you and your trading partner, your business, your wife, your husband, whatever it may be. You'd be protected up to a sum of £150,000 per account per firm. Under EU MiFID II, you're protected around Euro 20,000 to 25,000 per investor. So slightly less under SISEC and MiFID II, but you still have some protections in place. Now, as we move further out into the jurisdictions of regulation, that protection becomes obsolete, invalid. So again, if you believe you're signing up or registering with a broker and you're going to be protected under UK FCA or EU SISEC or AU ASIC, but you actually want leverage above 1 to 30, you are not protected by that at all. Okay? If you want to be protected underneath the Financial Services Compensation Scheme or EU MiFID II or AU ASIC's rules, then you have to go under that regulatory jurisdiction and that regulatory entity, which means you're going to be getting a maximum leverage of 1 to 30. Okay? So just bear that in mind. Again, each of these brokers are going to have KYC and AML registrations in place, because that is something that they have to be sticking to the rules. Otherwise, they could lose the higher, more prominent, more specific regulations under FCA, under SISEC, under ASIC. Now, the reason again, just to touch upon this, these brokers have done this is not necessarily because they wanted to. It's because they had no other choice. The FCA, SISEC, and ASIC have now restricted their leverage to 1 to 30. And under UK and EU, I haven't seen the AU rules specifically just yet, but under UK and EU, that also means that they've restricted their margin. Now, you usually and used to, pre-2017, pre-2018, you used to have the ability to have 100% margin stop outs on your positions. And of course, you'd either get a call, an email, and some brokers would give you an automatic stop, they would remove your position immediately without warning you and take full margin off that from your balance. They wouldn't even allow you to top up your margin. Hence why some brokers give you an email or a phone call and say, listen, your positions are underwater, you need to top up more margin, you need to deposit more money into your account, or we're going to have to close them. And if you couldn't put more money into your account to keep those positions open and top up that margin, trade closed, money gone, start all over. What it now has done, because of ESMA, is they've reduced the margin down to 50%, meaning that as soon as it gets to 50% of margin, for example, under the UK and European rules, in their regulated entity, they can either send you an email, give you a phone call, or automatically stop you out of your position. So just bear that in mind as well. Obviously, the more money you've got under management, realistically, 1 to 30 leverage is going to be suffice. Now, bearing in mind, the way we trade, we have higher margin, obviously because of the lot sizes we trade. So on 100,000 with 1 to 30 leverage, it's pretty much going to use a significant amount of that margin. However, when you factor in a lot of the considerations, how many of you have more than 2 or 3 trades open at any one time? Now, bearing in mind, we're talking risk positions, because if you free up risk, you crystallize and liquidate specific profit targets or specific profits within the positions that you've got open. When you take that risk and crystallize that liquidity and profit off of the table, you kind of rebalance your book, thus freeing up further margin to take additional positions. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, of course, be able to put on a position at full risk or the same amount of lot sizes, subject restricted to margin availability because you won't necessarily have that full margin available. However, it does free up that position to open up another trade if you've taken risk off of the table or crystallized some of that profit. So just, of course, bear that in mind. Now, I do want to touch upon a couple of unregulated brokers. This is just through my own due diligence. This is my own opinion. And there are several retail brokers out there that, whilst they are regulated, you don't necessarily want to trade through. So again, please feel free to reach out to me in private and we can have a chat about that in its entirety. I'm happy to go over the reasons why, in personal experience, in professional experience, and on pure regulatory experience, that you shouldn't necessarily go and work with them or go and trade through them. But there also are some brokers out there that are completely unregulated that you would not want to poke with a stick, let alone invest your money into, And it comes down to really understanding that. And of course, these brokers have been popping up very recently. There are more, but unfortunately, you've just got to be extremely careful. And if you're unsure, just scroll down to the footprint of the website and have a look. And that's actually something we'll do. So let's quickly jump in and we'll take a look at what kind of brokers, where to find their regulations. We'll have a look at a handful of brokers that are in the retail space, and we'll look at obviously the good, the bad and the ugly. And then hopefully that will provide you with some further clarity as well. So let's move into the brokers, and we'll start with IC Markets, as I tend to see that name being thrown around quite a lot. And whilst they're an absolutely incredible broker and their trading conditions are pretty good within the retail space, it's obviously the regulations that we're interested in. Now, IC Markets as a whole have a couple of different operations, like many brokers do this day and age. If we look at the regulations page that they have on offer under the icmarkets.eu, obviously they're regulated by SISEC under the Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission, and you are protected by the European market in financial instruments under MiFID MIFR. Okay, so how do we know they're regulated? One of the main reasons is usually within here you'll find their regulatory license number, which is right there, SISEC's registration number 362/18. And if we go on to their next page, you'll also find here additional regulatory information which complies under ASIC regulatory requirements, and this one here is where I'm seeing many of us start to veer to, because as of later this year, in the next couple of months, we're going to see them restricted by their leverage to 1:30 under European Commission, under SISEC, and of course under the Australian ASIC regulatory requirements as well. So the IC Markets Global complies with the FSA regulatory requirements and has in place internal risk management controls to ensure sufficient capital requirements are always maintained. External audits supplement IC Markets' global operational and accounting process and ensure full regulatory compliance. Now, the reason they have the FSA in place is because it's regulated in the Seychelles. Now, just to bear in mind, and I'll quickly cover this, if you want to be regulated under the UK FCA, I'm certain the financial requirements are in excess of 2 million to obviously have a regulatory presence and, of course, have sufficient capital requirements and allocations in place. Now, if to go and get a license from St. Vincent's and Grenadines and Seychelles and Mauritius, it costs a couple of thousand, 2,000 to 20,000. So it's a lot less to get, which obviously in turn means less cover, less protection and so forth. But in turn, it gives you higher leverage. So with IC Markets under the FSA through Seychelles, yeah, you're going to get the highest leverage possible and, of course, higher margin capabilities. But you do get less protection than you would get under SISEC and ASIC. Okay, so they do still offer segregation of client of funds across all three, as mentioned earlier in the PowerPoint. And as well, they do external auditing. They provide anti-money laundering, AML, KYC compliance across all three brands. And they do, of course, have their license numbers. For those of you that are interested, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can, of course, drop you the link for this page if you are with IC Markets or if you have any questions and further questions about them. But let's move on to TO Markets, another broker, obviously excellent trading conditions, raw spreads, zero commissions across some of their accounts. So again, very much up there with IC Markets, just a lesser known brand. These guys are regulated under the UK FCA, and they are also regulated under St Vincent's and Grenadines, which you can see down the bottom here. TO Markets UK and TO Markets Limited, so two different entities. So as you can see down here, two different entities, TO Markets UK and TO Markets Limited, obviously both formed from the same holdings company up here, and they're registered and regulated in St Vincent's and the Grenadines as an IBC with registration number here, and of course they have their FCA FRN number here as well. So again, very good company. Obviously, like IC Markets, offer segregated custodial accounts, offer negative balance protection, and of course external audits, regulatory compliance across all of them, and their license numbers of course as well, Moving on to Pepperstone, again alongside IC Markets and TO, they offer multiple regulations, multiple client protection and security, and again they do also have very good trading conditions, spreads, commissions. The only difference is their ping speed on execution is slightly higher. But if we look at their regulation, you can see that they take their compliance obligations seriously, allegedly, as they say here, and they act responsibly with your client's money, or with our client's money. So they're regulated across ASIC, FCA, SISEC, BaFin, DFSA, SCB, and CMA. So outside of these three, their offshore entities will allow different leverage conditions, different trading conditions, and potentially lesser regulatory protection for the clients. Although they take it seriously, they still give and provide the ability for them to open accounts with their offshore, semi-regulated, unregulated entities to trade through, whilst also offering the additional client protections such as segregated custodial accounts. Moving across to Oanda, the primary reason for me utilising this broker within the regulatory discussion is because it is something that many of our trading community utilise across TradingView for its analytical services, and I know some within our community do also have private accounts with them as well. So in terms of their regulatory and financial compliance, they do say that you can feel confident when you do business with us here at Oanda, and that sounds like I work for them. I don't. Just quote for words here, Oanda has built an enviable performance record since the launch of their FX trade platform in 01. They support regulatory oversight in the industry and the protection of Forex customers and strive to meet or exceed the requirements of the regulators. So the Oanda Corporation is registered retail foreign exchange dealer, the RFED with the US Commodities Futures Trading Commission and the CFTC, and is a Forex dealer member, the FDM of the National Futures Association, so NFA, with their NFA number to the side. They've also got regulations and licenses within the Asia Pacific PTE in Singapore by the Monetary Authority of Singapore under their CMS license, and the International Enterprise for Singapore, the Commodity Brokers license, as you can see there. They do have a Canadian operations, which is regulated by the Canadian Investment Industry Regulatory Organisation of Canada, the IIROC. Oanda Europe, which is SISEC, and of course they also have the Oanda Europe FCA UK, which is where they're pointing their European entity to, which is their FRN number right there. They have a Japanese operation which holds Type 1 financial instruments license from the Japanese Financial Services Agency, and their registration with the Kanto Local Financial Bureau, and of course the Financial Futures Association of Japan. And their Australian operation, which allows them to be regulated under ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Conditions. They also have the Australian regulatory jurisdiction. And they're also regulated by ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, with their ABN number there as well. So financial compliance, they do require to file financial reports with regulators in the jurisdictions where they do business, and to retain an international professional accountant firm to audit their financial statements externally. So they do compile and submit their financial data to regulators on a regular basis. and the financial regulations require Oanda to maintain capital reserves at specified levels. Our capital reserves far exceed those levels, so that's quite reassuring. In terms of their risk management, customer funds in accounts at top tier banks, and it's their policy to only withdraw customer funds as a direct result of their trading related activities or withdrawal requests. They partner with the world's leading banks to both access and provide global forex liquidity to manage currency exposure and risk. They use sophisticated risk management technology to net aggregate client positions automatically and anonymously, and they immediately hedge outstanding aggregated positions above predefined thresholds with their partner banks. So overall, Oanda is very well regulated across multiple jurisdictions, including the United States, which is specifically and especially good for members within Phantom that are trading from the US. Moving into FXCM, as you can see here, FXCM has multiple different regulatory jurisdictions and entities. Now, the main reason for me covering FXCM is because many of us within Phantom utilize the analytical tools on TradingView, primarily because the pricing tracks closely and very similar to that of FTMO. Now, you can see FXCM have regulations under the UK FCA, ASIC under Australia, and of course European SISEC, and they also have the operation and regulation in South Africa. So if you're looking to open a trading account with FXCM and you want leverage above 1 to 30 and of course additional protections potentially levied, you're going to primarily be looking to open and register a trading account through their South African region so that you get access to higher margin and higher leverage requirements. But ultimately, they've got additional protections in place. They do offer some significant regulations, and of course, they do protect client funds. As you can see here, they offer regulation and license, client funds segregation, as well as client funds security under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. But again, that is under only their UK FCA brand. So if you are looking to be protected under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme and the FCA's regulation, you need to be opening and registering a trading account via their UK FCA platform. And the same for the European SISEC under the MiFID MIFR rules for 25,000 under that client protection, and the same for Australia under the ASIC protection as well. In terms of their other regulations around South Africa, please feel free to of course conduct further due diligence on the protections and requirements needed. If you do require or would like any help in doing so and support in doing so, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or queries in the questions channel within Phantom and Discord. Alternatively, please feel free to reach out to me privately in DM. Moving on to the final two brokers of this panel. Now, this is primarily to show you what broker you shouldn't be trading with and you shouldn't have a trading account through. There are several more, but please feel free to reach out to me again privately, and I'm more than happy to cover them with you. So one of the ones that I'm seeing pop up quite often across social media most recently is Cedar FX. Now, whilst they'll plant a tree for every plant 10 trees, for every lot traded, they're not regulated, and it states down here at their footer of their website, this website is not directed at any jurisdiction and is not intended for any use that would be contrary to local law or regulation. So I don't know what kind of protection they have in place for their clients. Realistically, they will have custodial segregated accounts. However, because they're not regulated, in my opinion, I would not poke them with a stick, let alone put my money in there to trade through them. So that's pretty much done with Cedar FX. There's nothing more to say about them. I wouldn't wish this company on my worst enemy. Maybe I would, not sure. But ultimately, it's a broker for me that you would realistically avoid. And moving on to the final broker that is pretty much in the same realm is a company, again, that pops up on social media a lot, which is Eagle FX. Now again, these guys are not regulated at all. They mention obviously that they're registered in the Commonwealth of Dominica, but if you notice at the bottom of their kind of website in their footprints is that they mention that they're not protected, the regulatory jurisdictions aren't available. If we jump back to CEDA, it says exactly the same in a similar nature. This website is not directed at any jurisdiction and is not intended for use that would be contrary to local law or regulation. We can go into here and try to establish what protections they've got, but ultimately they're not regulated, and it's something that you have to be extremely careful of. To summarise, whilst this video has been pretty boring for you, I'm sure, my monotone and the regulatory environment isn't exactly the one that lights your rockets, so to speak. Hopefully you all can make an informed decision about which broker to use following this video. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, please feel free to either reach out within the questions channel within Discord. Alternatively, please feel free to reach out to me in private via DM if you're looking for any additional help on what broker to use, quality spreads, excellent trading conditions, leverage conditions, margin conditions, low commissions, and ultimately some of the best trading conditions out there, whilst of course putting your protection and your funds at ease and your mind at ease, and of course making sure you're extra safe and secure. Have a lovely weekend, but that's all for now, and I look forward to catching up with you in the community.